The doctor didn't sit down. He stood near the glass wall of the ICU consultation room, one hand still gripping the file, the other pressed flat against the table like he needed the support. His badge read Dr. Michael Harris, but he didn't look at me when he spoke. He lowered his voice, glanced once at the closed door, and said a single sentence that made the air feel heavier than the machines humming behind us. If these consent papers were signed under your name while a compliance flag was active, he said, you could be personally liable for everything that happens in this room, including outcomes tied to decisions you didn't make. I didn't answer right away. Panic wastes time. Numbers don't. I watched his fingers instead. They were shaking, just slightly, the way professionals shake only when they already know the outcome. I asked him what compliance flag he meant, and that was when he finally looked at me. His eyes tightened. His jaw locked. Like he'd just realized my confusion wasn't an act. He slid the file toward me but didn't let go. That's what I need to confirm, he said quietly, before we go any further. The hallway outside smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor beeped in a steady rhythm, indifferent to the possibility of my life being quietly rerouted by paperwork. My sister, Lauren, wasn't in the room. She'd stepped out earlier to handle a call. Lauren always handled things. When our father died, she handled the paperwork. When Mom got sick, she handled the insurance. When I collapsed at home 2 nights ago and woke up under fluorescent lights, she handled the hospital. Or so I thought. Dr. Harris finally released the file. The top page wasn't medical. It was administrative. Consent authorization. Financial responsibility acknowledgement. Compliance disclosure. My name was printed cleanly at the top. Too clean. The signature looked like mine, but it wasn't. It was careful. Practiced. Slower than how I usually signed when I was rushed or exhausted. A chill settled behind my ribs. I didn't sign this, I said. My voice sounded steady. That surprised even me. Dr. Harris nodded once, like that was the answer he'd been expecting, but hoping not to hear. That's a problem, he said. He turned the page. These documents were submitted while this facility was already under a compliance review, he continued. Environmental, billing, and insurance audits. Normally, new patient consents are paused when a compliance marker is active. He stopped, then added, yours weren't. How much liability are we talking about? I asked. He hesitated just long enough to tell me the number was bad. If complications arise, he said, you're looking at upward of $400,000. And that doesn't include potential insurance denial or future coverage restrictions if fraud becomes part of the record. Fraud. The word landed harder than the number. $400,000 for documents I never signed. For decisions I never made. For a compliance system I didn't even know existed. Somewhere between the beeping machines and the faint sound of wheels rolling down the hall, something shifted inside me. Not fear. Awareness. Lauren returned 10 minutes later, breathless, apologetic, carrying 2 coffees like a peace offering. She smiled when she saw me sitting upright. See, she said brightly. You're already looking better. She set the cups down. Dr. Harris excused himself with a nod, promising to return once he'd verified a few things with compliance. Lauren's eyes followed him out. Just for half a second, the softness dropped. Calculation flashed through. Then it was gone. I noticed it because I was finally looking. What did you sign? I asked. She laughed lightly, like I'd made a joke. Just standard stuff. Don't stress yourself out. I picked up the coffee, felt the heat through the cup. Grounded myself in it. Lauren, I said calmly. What did you sign in my name? Her smile tightened. Not vanished, tightened. I already told you, she said. Consent. Financial acknowledgement. Same thing you would have signed anyway. She paused, then added, with a trace of irritation, they don't run hospitals on vibes. That was the first real red flag. Lauren never assumed. She controlled. There was a difference. That night, after she insisted on staying at my apartment, just in case, I waited until she fell asleep on the couch. I opened my laptop and logged into my patient portal. The timestamps didn't line up. Documents uploaded while I was unconscious. A middle initial added where I usually left it out. A secondary authorization form I'd never seen before, one that referenced an active compliance flag acknowledgement. One clause kept repeating, buried deep in dense language about responsibility transfers during investigations. Compliance. 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 I remembered Lauren saying years ago, during an argument with her ex, if you don't control the paperwork controls you. I'd laughed then. Now it didn't feel funny. The next morning, Dr. Harris called me back into the consultation room. This time, the door was locked. A woman sat beside him, tablet already open. Sandra Lee, she said. Hospital compliance. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Your sister identified herself as your legal proxy, she said. But there is no active documentation supporting that status. Lauren wasn't in the room. Sandra continued, the issue isn't just consent. Your name appears on a financial responsibility chain connected to an ongoing compliance investigation. That chain was activated when these forms were submitted. By someone else, I said. Sandra nodded. That's what we're determining. When I returned home later that day, Lauren was gone. So was her overnight bag. She'd left a note on the counter in her neat handwriting. Had to take care of something urgent. Call me when you're up. I didn't call. I opened my laptop again. I pulled every document. Every version. Every timestamp. Patterns don't lie. People do. By the time my phone buzzed with a message from Lauren, everything's handled. Don't worry, I already knew one thing for sure. Whatever she thought she'd protected herself with, she'd used my name to do it. And once your name enters a system under compliance investigation, it doesn't come out quietly. The bank officer closed the glass door behind her before she spoke. Not slammed. Not rushed. Just carefully, like someone who didn't want their words leaking into the hallway. My name is Rebecca Collins, she said, folding her hands on the desk. And before we continue, I need to ask you something very specific. Her smile was polite. Her eyes were not. Did you personally authorize any financial instruments or liability transfers in the last 72 hours under your social security number? I stared at the framed certificate behind her, FDIC Compliance Training, 2023, and felt the same quiet pressure I'd felt in the ICU. No, I said. Rebecca exhaled through her nose, almost imperceptibly, then tapped her keyboard twice and turned the screen toward me. Then we have a problem, she said. Because your name just triggered a secondary review tied to an existing compliance flag. There it was again. Compliance. She scrolled slowly. I recognized my address. My phone number. Even my emergency contact, Lauren. What kind of instruments? I asked. Rebecca hesitated. Short-term credit exposure. Medical lien pre-authorization. And a provisional trust designation. My pulse stayed steady. Inside, something cold settled. A trust? I repeated. I don't have a trust. Rebecca tilted her head. According to this, you do. Or, you did. She clicked again. A PDF opened. The document was dense, aggressively professional. My name appeared no less than 14 times. At the bottom was a familiar, careful signature. Not mine. This trust was activated 6 months ago, she said. Dormant. No assets. No activity. Until 2 nights ago. I thought of Lauren sitting at my kitchen counter, sipping coffee, telling me everything was handled. What happened 2 nights ago? I asked. Rebecca's voice dropped. It accepted liability. For a moment, the office felt too quiet. I could hear the faint hum of printers behind the wall. The click of keyboards, systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. How much? I asked. Rebecca didn't soften it. Between the hospital exposure and linked accounts, roughly $387,000. Potentially more if the compliance audit escalates. I nodded once. Numbers didn't scare me. Ignorance did. Who set it up? I asked. Rebecca met my eyes. Someone with intimate access. Your identifiers. Your history. And just enough legal knowledge to think they were being clever. Clever. That word followed me all the way home. Lauren didn't answer my calls. She texted instead. You need to stop talking to people. Let me fix this. I didn't respond. I opened the trust document again on my laptop. Read it line by line. The language was clean, conservative, almost boring. Which meant it had been written by someone who understood systems, not emotion. A revocable trust. Temporary. Designed to absorb liability and then dissolve. Except for one clause, buried deep. Successor beneficiary, Lauren Matthews. Not guardian. Not executor. Beneficiary. That was when memory clicked into place. 6 months ago, Lauren had insisted I let her streamline my paperwork after my promotion. Just in case, she'd said. You don't want things messy if something happens. I'd sign what I thought were HR forms. I'd been wrong. I called Sandra Lee from hospital compliance. She answered on the second ring. You were right, I said. This isn't just medical. No, she agreed calmly. It never is. She explained how layered systems worked. How compliance flags talked to banks. How hospitals shared risk data. How once a name became a node in an investigation, it attracted scrutiny like gravity. And your sister? I asked. Sandra paused. She's not stupid, she said carefully. But she underestimated one thing. What? You, Sandra said. And time. That night, I stopped confronting and started documenting. Screenshots. PDFs, metadata. I pulled my credit report and found a soft inquiry from a legal services firm I'd never contacted. Another micro twist. Another thread. Lauren finally called near midnight. You're overthinking this, she said, irritation bleeding through her controlled tone. I was protecting you. By making yourself the beneficiary? I asked. Silence stretched. That's not what this is about, she said finally. You wouldn't understand. I smiled to myself, alone in the dark. That was the line people used when they knew understanding would destroy them. The next morning, I sat across from an attorney named Mark Reynolds, recommended quietly by Sandra. He didn't promise anything. He didn't dramatize. He just read. After 20 minutes, he closed the file. She created a liability sponge, he said. And put you inside it. Why? I asked. Because when it collapses, he said, she walks away clean. Or she thought she would. I leaned back. Calm. Focused. What happens next? I asked. Mark looked at me, something like respect flickering across his face. Now, he said, we let her keep signing. And for the first time since the ICU, I felt it. Not fear. Momentum. If you're still with me right now, just know this, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. Lauren thought she was moving assets. She had no idea she was building a paper trail. And systems never forget. I woke to a quiet that didn't feel like peace. It was more like the calm before a storm, measured, deliberate, the kind of stillness that comes when every possibility has been considered. The hospital corridor outside my room hummed faintly with the murmur of monitors and distant rolling carts. My sister, Lauren, was there again, clipboard in hand, moving with that same composed precision I had always admired and resented. She had signed something on my behalf yesterday. She had said it was routine, necessary. But the look on Dr. Harris's face when he saw my name on the papers told a different story. His hands trembled, fingers hovering over the charts as if he could rewind time and undo the signature. You need to know, these documents tie you directly to decisions you didn't make, he said, voice low, almost shaking. The ICU door shut behind him with a definitive click. My pulse remained calm. Fear was a signal, not a chain. From that moment, everything seemed to fracture around me and yet come into focus at the same time. I thought back to the small details from the past few months, Lauren's insistence on handling all hospital communications, her quiet assurance that she knew what was best for me and, more importantly, for my daughter, Mia. She was never harsh, never brash, always a guiding hand. But her competence had a shadow, the way she positioned herself between me and any document, any signature, any choice I might make. It was subtle, almost invisible, but strategically perfect. She always made it seem like I was consenting, agreeing, even initiating. And now, the reality was glaring. My name on that signature line was entangled in something far beyond a routine hospital procedure. I checked the timestamps on the electronic filing. Lauren had uploaded the forms at 3:14 a.m., long after I had drifted into the sedated haze of pre-procedure medication. The middle initial discrepancy should have been minor, most clerks wouldn't notice, but it was enough to raise an internal flag in the hospital compliance system. My pulse remained calm. I cataloged every detail silently, the timestamp, the slight smudge on the signature line, the rapid approval by a junior nurse, and the brief hesitation from the billing clerk before she moved on. Each small inconsistency was another thread in a growing tapestry of exposure. From panic to quiet confidence, I noted, every micro-error was a potential lever. Ethan's role, of course, remained peripheral but omnipresent. His charming, overconfident texts from the night before had nothing to do with this. He had assumed the divorce would give him full control, that paperwork and signatures were just formalities to be swept aside. He had underestimated both Lauren and me. That underestimation was dangerous, but also necessary. I made mental notes of the sequence of his oversight, the missed conference call, the hurried bank instructions, the trust documents he had skimmed and approved. Every action, every inaction, built the foundation for what was now unfolding, a slow, inevitable collapse. Microtwists began layering themselves in my mind. First, the compliance flag noted in my hospital file. Then, the unusual alert from the insurance provider about procedural liabilities. Next, the shell account Lauren had mentioned in passing weeks ago, a financial echo that only now connected with the federal audit notice quietly sitting in the back of my inbox. Each piece was small, almost mundane, but together, they formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. I ignored a call from Rachel, who had sent a seemingly innocent check-in message. Her digital footprint placed her directly at the center of a minor authorization I hadn't approved. Silent, almost invisible, these threads were weaving a cage around the unseen forces that Ethan thought he controlled. And they didn't know it yet. Lauren moved with the calm precision of someone who had anticipated every variable. She handed me a sealed envelope containing a summary of the audit points, her eyes meeting mine briefly. "Everything you need is here," she said softly, no apology, no insistence. I opened it. The numbers, the dates, the cross-references, they aligned perfectly with the compliance anomaly. A minor detail, a child clause in the hospital authorization, made my heart pause briefly. This wasn't just paperwork, it had consequences. But my pulse remained calm. I understood immediately. The micro-twist wasn't a threat in the loud, obvious sense. It was a slow, careful pivot that could shift authority, accountability, and exposure in one precise motion. Dr. Harris returned, papers in hand. He whispered something that tightened the atmosphere. "Once these entries are processed, reversing them will require federal involvement. Your daughter's records, your insurance, everything falls under scrutiny." It wasn't panic I felt. It was clarity. Every subtle red flag from the past, each ignored email, each supposed routine signature, each casual nod from hospital staff, suddenly converged. The chain was set, and I had been observing quietly, letting the pattern emerge. Ethan, blissfully unaware, was walking straight into it. My calm mind cataloged every move, every reaction. Every shadow of arrogance on his part became another predictable element in the slow crescendo I could now control. By the afternoon, the subtle pressure had begun to show externally. The nurse assigned to the file double-checked entries she had approved, the insurance agent hesitated before confirming coverage, and even the hospital compliance officer paused at one line, flipping through the digital archive before continuing. Microtwists, once invisible, now rippled outward. An almost unnoticed reference to an environmental compliance clause triggered a secondary review. A minor audit discrepancy caused an internal flag. A shell account linked to prior payments was quietly noted. And through it all, my pulse remained calm. Observation had become action, and action was silent but irreversible. Rachel's disappearance from digital correspondence, subtle but deliberate, added another layer. I noted the absence, cataloged it, and let it sit in my mental ledger. Each absence, each ignored message, each delayed response became part of the architecture of quiet control. The narrative was shifting, though no one realized it yet. Ethan's confidence, his belief in an easy victory, remained intact, but it was built on misperception and flawed assumptions. The hospital, the system, the compliance measures, they were all quiet instruments in a symphony of exposure that I had patiently set in motion. Even as night approached, the tension remained tight but not explosive. Lauren handled the remaining communications with a measured precision that kept authority figures engaged but unaware of the larger pattern forming. Each micro-twist reinforced another, subtle enough to avoid detection but strong enough to create inevitable consequences. The child clause, the federal audit hint, the insurance liability, they were all invisible levers, carefully positioned to topple assumptions and overconfidence. And through it all, my pulse remained calm. Fear was a signal, not a chain. Observation had become strategy. And in that strategy, the inevitable collapse of overconfidence and mismanagement was quietly guaranteed. By the end of part 3, the narrative had tightened around the essential truth. Ethan thought the divorce was the conclusion. He didn't yet know that the midpoint had been engineered, that each document, each signature, each oversight had been a building block toward an irreversible shift. The subtle but critical tension was anchored. Once a system is engaged in such a deliberate sequence, there is no undoing it. And as I closed the file and set it aside, my pulse remained calm. The micro-twists were complete, the chain unbroken, and the system poised to act. I was ready. And once the system starts, it never asks permission. The morning light was filtered, gray, through the hospital blinds, casting stripes across the floor that seemed to mirror the rigid structure of every document I had just reviewed. I held a folder in my hands, thick with paper, spreadsheets, and carefully annotated notes. The weight of it felt physical, proof, leverage, inevitability, all bound between manila edges. My pulse remained calm. It had become a habit, a shield, a strategic lens through which every moment, every decision, and every human emotion passed. Dr. Harris entered quietly, clipboard under arm, eyes scanning the room before settling on me. He paused, swallowing as if he'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. "There's an additional liability clause here, tied to previous admissions and insurance authorizations," he said, voice low, hands steady despite the tremor in his throat. "If these are executed incorrectly, there's personal exposure." He didn't need to elaborate. I already understood. The micro-twist he hinted at was enough. My daughter, my future autonomy, every carefully constructed move I had made, all quietly under threat. But fear, again, was a signal, not a chain. The folder revealed a subtle, but critical pattern, timestamps from 3 different departments aligned with Lauren's careful manipulations, confirming that her signature wasn't just routine, it was perfectly orchestrated. A minor discrepancy in patient authorization codes created an automatic federal alert. Another seemingly insignificant note from the billing office indicated a delayed transfer of funds, connecting directly to a shell account I hadn't known existed. Every layer was deliberate, every action strategically positioned to reveal exactly what Ethan had overlooked. Ethan himself was blissfully unaware, continuing his day with confident texts, empty reassurances, and the assumption that the divorce had granted him total authority. His arrogance would be his undoing. I cataloged each oversight silently, the missed emails from compliance, the misfiled insurance claim, the mismatched account numbers, all threads in a system I now controlled. Observation had transformed into leverage. And leverage, when paired with patience, was irreversible. Lauren was present but silent, a quiet mirror to my own focus. She had always been efficient, never intrusive, always guiding. But now, her role was evident as the architect of invisible pathways that led directly to this inevitable tipping point. She handed me an envelope without a word, her gaze briefly meeting mine, acknowledgement, not intimacy. Inside, summaries of internal audits and the flagged anomalies. One minor clause, referencing federal audit compliance, gave me pause. This wasn't just documentation. It was a map of authority, accountability, and exposure, ready to shift power at the right moment. I moved through the hospital corridors, files tucked under my arm, a silent observer in a space full of unaware agents. Nurses double-checked logs I had already analyzed. Compliance officers lingered over screen prompts. Even the insurance coordinator paused mid-entry. Each small pause, each procedural hesitation, was a ripple in a chain I had set into motion. My pulse remained calm, yet my mind raced strategically, noting every possible variable. The subtle pressure, once internal, was now manifesting externally, tightening the system's grip around the unsuspecting antagonist. By mid-afternoon, micro-twists began to converge. A shell account I'd traced to minor pre-authorization payments linked to Ethan's own financial missteps. A previously overlooked liability clause in Mia's care authorization flagged automatically, demanding a corrective review. Another layer, a misaligned timestamp from the pharmacy department, exposed an error that, while minor on paper, indicated systemic oversight on Ethan's part. Every move I hadn't made directly, every inaction on his, strengthened the inevitability of what was coming. Observation had evolved into precise, actionable strategy. Lauren, once a background actor in the unfolding drama, now became a quiet partner in exposure. Her subtle nods, her timed document submissions, her silent guidance through hospital bureaucracy, all ensured that nothing would slip past the system unnoticed. Ethan remained unaware, text messages ignored, confidence unshaken. His hubris blinded him to the inevitability of what was building around him, a chain of exposure, micro-twists, and procedural traps all orchestrated silently, methodically, and irreversibly. As evening approached, the tension solidified. The hospital, once a place of routine motion and measured urgency, now pulsed with invisible electricity, tiny flags, minor hesitations, procedural anomalies, all converging toward a moment of undeniable consequence. Each authority figure, from billing clerks to Dr. Harris, was part of a lattice I had observed, understood, and now subtly directed. My pulse remained calm, my mind focused. I knew the tipping point was approaching. Ethan's next move would be irrelevant. The chain I had set was beyond his comprehension, beyond his control. By the time I returned to my temporary apartment, the folder secured, the micro-twists catalogued, and the system quietly ticking toward the next phase, clarity settled in. Ethan's assumption that the divorce had ended all control was dangerously flawed. Every layer, every detail, every procedural anomaly had been noted, prepared, and positioned. The slow, patient collapse of overconfidence had begun. And through it all, I remained a silent force, unshaken, observing, cataloging, anticipating. Fear had not entered my calculation. I was ready. The system was ready. And when it moved, there would be no turning back. I woke that morning with a calm I hadn't felt in years, the kind of stillness that only comes after storms have been mapped, studied, and finally understood. The stack of documents on my kitchen table felt lighter than it should have. Coffee steamed gently beside my laptop, yet the tension didn't vanish, it had just transformed. Every file I had meticulously reviewed, every timestamp and signature I had traced, every subtle hint I had collected from hospital logs, bank compliance emails, and federal audit notices now converged into a single, undeniable pattern. I wasn't rushing. I didn't panic. I had spent months preparing, and finally, the moment had arrived. The first knock on my front door was subtle. Not a hammering, just that polite, professional rap that always precedes authority. I didn't look up immediately, scanning through the latest PDF evidence of Lauren's transactions. Then it came again, a little firmer. I recognized the style instantly, Attorney Whitman. Calm, collected, but authoritative. My pulse didn't spike. My mind cataloged. This wasn't a social call. This was the final chess move. Whitman's eyes met mine across the threshold, his hand holding a thick folder. Miss Parker, there are decisions in here that cannot be reversed. And you, legally, are the only one who can enforce them. His voice dropped, just enough for the words to resonate, carrying a weight I had anticipated but still respected. He didn't need to raise it. The letters in bold on the top sheet screamed compliance violations, asset freezes, shell account exposure, everything meticulously documented and ready for court presentation. I opened the door fully, letting him in. My daughter, Emma, peeked from the hallway, quiet but curious. I smiled at her, gentle and reassuring, because my calm needed to anchor hers. Whitman set the folder on the counter, flipping it open with deliberate care. They believed they could manipulate, misdirect, and erase your name. But the compliance markers, timestamps, and federal audits say otherwise. You're protected, strategically and legally. Every line of this folder confirmed months of silent observation and patience. I had not cried. I had not begged. I had not confronted with anger. I had quietly collected, cataloged, and waited for the moment when the system itself would deliver justice. And now, that moment had come. Flashbacks hit me not with pain, but with clarity. Lauren signing those papers in the hospital while I was unconscious. Ethan's casual calls, bragging about manipulating the insurance clauses and diverting funds. The false supporter, Rachel, always appearing helpful, subtly nudging the decisions my sister had made into their favor. Every micro-twist, every slight misstep on their part, had been silently documented, layer by layer, timestamp by timestamp. Whitman leaned closer. The shell accounts, the unauthorized waivers, the hidden liabilities, all of them point back to them. They cannot argue around this. And your signature, while forged, will be legally traced back to them under federal scrutiny. Their window has closed. The realization settled. They had thought overconfidence would carry them. They had underestimated patience, precision, and intelligence. And most importantly, they had never accounted for one crucial factor: calm strategy. I felt a quiet smile creep onto my face, a subtle victory that needed no audience. Emma wandered closer, sensing the shift, and I ruffled her hair. "Everything's going to be okay," I said. Hours later, the court presentation began. Not flashy, not dramatic, just controlled, documented, undeniable. Whitman guided every step, walking through the shell companies, the forged waivers, the audit flags, and the timestamps showing Lauren and Ethan's missteps. Every document I had collected played its role. The judge's eyebrows knitted slightly as she examined the evidence. The public gallery was silent, but the tension was palpable. Ethan's face betrayed him before words did. His overconfidence, the casual arrogance with which he had approached every past step, now cracked. He opened his mouth, but Whitman's calm voice cut through. "All evidence points to violations you personally authorized or oversaw. There is no ambiguity." Ethan's hands trembled, his usual charm evaporated in the room. The documents were absolute. Then came the micro-twists unfolding one after another. Hidden debts revealed in unassuming invoices. Insurance anomalies traced back to Lauren's accounts. Federal notices quietly confirming their liabilities. Rachel's subtle disappearance was noted in a short email thread, proving her was knowingly complicit and yet ultimately irrelevant. Each twist, public but controlled, left them exposed without theatrics. By late afternoon, the collapse was complete. Ethan slumped into a chair, realizing the financial and legal web he had spun had ensnared him instead. Lauren, usually composed and commanding, now looked smaller, off balance, defeated by her own manipulations. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just the quiet understanding that control had shifted permanently. I stepped outside afterward, Emma holding my hand. The evening air was crisp, free of tension, but carrying the lingering satisfaction of justice served. I didn't need to celebrate with wealth or grand gestures. My freedom, my dignity, and my child's protection were more than enough. I had one not because of theatrics, but because patience, intelligence, and careful documentation had built a fortress around me. Looking back at the house one last time, I realized the full truth. Overconfidence and deception can never outpace preparation and strategy. The system, when navigated correctly, will always favor evidence and precision. And the quiet victories, the ones that don't make headlines but protect what matters most, are the most profound. I held Emma close, her small hand in mine, and whispered softly, "We're free now. Not because we have more, but because we are safe and we are wise." She smiled, and for the first time in months, I let myself breathe without calculation or fear. Whitman waved goodbye, leaving the folder in my hands, a symbol, not of wealth, but of justice, irrevocable and exact. And as I watched him leave, the final piece clicked. I wasn't rich. I was free. And that freedom, calm and unwavering, was the kind of victory worth every silent battle I had fought. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the driveway. I didn't need validation from anyone else. The system had confirmed the truth. And in that quiet, precise closure, I found what I had been building toward all along: peace, dignity, and the assurance that nothing could undo the protection I had secured for my child and myself.